in a serene, tree-lined neighborhood where the lawns were manicured and the picket fences gleamed white, there was an unspoken understanding, a set of invisible rules carefully upheld by those who had always lived there. But one family's arrival disrupted this fragile facade. They were met not with open arms, but with cold stares, whispered gossip, and a lingering discomfort that only seemed to grow. This story begins not with overt violence or loud confrontations, but with small, deliberate acts of exclusion and escalating hostility. What started as passive resistance soon became a calculated effort to force this family out of their own home. An effort led by a woman whose quiet smiles masked something much darker. She thought she held all the power, but what she didn't know would unravel her world in ways she could never have imagined. This isn't just a story about prejudice. It's about what happens when that prejudice is met with justice in its most unexpected form. You're about to witness a story that will challenge the very foundations of what we think we know about power, ownership, and the quiet dangers of hatred. A black family moves into their dream home, only to face relentless attempts to drive them away by their white neighbor, a woman who will stop at nothing to regain her sense of control. But what she doesn't realize is that the house she's trying to reclaim never truly belonged to her. Stick with us as we uncover the layers of manipulation, the shocking truth that brought this story to light, and the haunting events that followed. Don't miss a single moment of this chilling tale. Leave a comment below as the story unfolds. What would you do if this happened in your neighborhood? To understand the events that unfolded, we must first look at the silent undercurrents of history. Suburban America has long been a symbol of opportunity and peace, yet it has also been a battleground, a place where invisible barriers determined who belonged and who did not. Redlining, exclusionary zoning laws, and decades of systemic inequity laid the groundwork for neighborhoods like this one. Even today, for many families of color, the dream of home ownership often comes with a shadow, the pressure to prove you deserve to live where others feel you do not belong. And in this case, that pressure became a weapon wielded by one woman who would go to great lengths to maintain the status quo. She was the kind of person you'd expect to find in a neighborhood like this, polished, always smiling in a way that seemed a little too practiced. Her name was Karen, a name that, over time, would take on an almost ominous meaning in this story. To those who didn't know her well, she appeared friendly, even warm. She hosted block parties, kept her flower beds perfectly maintained, and waved politely to passers-by. But underneath her carefully curated exterior was something less benign. When the Johnson family moved into the house next door, Karen's smile faltered for the first time in years. At first, she told herself it wasn't about race. It was about tradition. She liked things to stay the way they were. The neighborhood had always been a place where people like her lived. People who, in her words, understood the values of the community. But her actions told a different story. She began to keep a watchful eye on the Johnsons, peering through her blinds at all hours. She noted how they dressed, what cars they drove, even how loud their children played in the backyard. Small things began to irritate her. A toy left on the sidewalk, the faint sound of music during family gatherings, the laughter that spilled from their windows at night. And that irritation quickly grew into something more insidious. They don't belong here. They're ruining everything. How do they even afford that house? Karen's resentment became an obsession. She didn't just watch them. She documented them. She made notes of their comings and goings, took pictures of their property, and even began complaining to the homeowners association about imagined infractions. To the Johnsons, it was subtle at first, an unwelcome glare, an unkind comment, but nothing overt enough to suggest the storm that was brewing just below the surface. The Johnson family was everything you'd hope to find in neighbors. Marcus Johnson was a software engineer, quiet and reserved, with a sharp mind and a kind heart. His wife Denise was a teacher, known for her warmth and dedication to her students. Their two children, Ayanna and Caleb, were excited about their new home and the big backyard where they could play for hours. For the Johnsons, this house was more than just a place to live. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and a dream finally realized. Denise had fallen in love with the wraparound porch and the big windows that let sunlight flood the rooms. Marcus couldn't wait to set up his home office, and the kids couldn't get enough of the playground nearby. It was perfect, or so it seemed at first. But soon the dream began to fray at the edges. Mail started going missing. Important documents, packages the kids had eagerly awaited. Their car tires were mysteriously deflated one morning, and then there were the noises at night. At first, Marcus and Denise thought it was just the creaks and groans of an old house settling. But then they began to hear more. The faint crunch of footsteps on their lawn, the sound of whispers just outside their windows. The children started to feel it too. Ayanna told her parents she felt like someone was watching her when she played outside. Caleb refused to sleep alone, saying he heard voices in his room at night. The family tried to brush it off as their imaginations, but deep down, they knew something wasn't right. Their new home, a place that should have been a sanctuary, was starting to feel more like a target. And all the while Karen watched, she waited, and she planned. Karen had always been the sort of person who knew how to work a system. If she couldn't get the Johnsons to leave by subtle intimidation, she would find a way to use the neighborhood's rules against them. After all, she had been a prominent voice in the homeowners association for years, attending every meeting and carefully cultivating her influence. And now, she was ready to wield that influence like a weapon. Her first move was to file complaint after complaint with the HOA. She claimed the Johnsons' yard was unkempt, their trash bins were left out too long, and that their children were creating a noise disturbance. None of these claims held much weight, but Karen knew that repetition could create a narrative. If she reported them often enough, eventually someone would take her side. Next came the legal notices. At first glance, they appeared official, complete with the HOA's letterhead and legal jargon, but they were fabrications, carefully designed to intimidate. Karen had even gone so far as to draft a notice threatening eviction, claiming the Johnsons' property violated zoning laws. And then there were the rumors. Karen began spreading lies to other neighbors, whispering that the Johnsons were involved in illegal activities, that they were dangerous, that they didn't belong. These whispers grew into a murmur that spread across the community, isolating the Johnsons further. The once friendly faces of their neighbors became cold, their greetings replaced with curt nods or silence. But Karen wasn't just lying to others, she was lying to herself. She convinced herself that she was protecting the neighborhood, that she had a duty to maintain its character. Yet, as her tactics became more desperate, it was clear that this was no longer about the Johnsons at all. It was about Karen's need to control, her refusal to accept change, and the festering prejudice that had consumed her. For Marcus and Denise, the harassment felt like a nightmare they couldn't wake from. At first, they tried to brush it off as minor inconveniences, telling themselves it wasn't personal. But as the complaints and accusations piled up, the stress began to take its toll. "What do they want from us?" Marcus would ask, his voice tinged with frustration and exhaustion. Denise didn't have an answer. She tried reaching out to Karen, hoping for a rational conversation, but Karen's responses were always the same: vague, polite refusals to engage, layered with thinly veiled hostility. "I don't know what you're talking about," Karen said one day, her tone dripping with condescension, "but maybe if you people followed the rules, you wouldn't have so many problems." Denise's heart sank. She knew what Karen really meant by "you people." The stress began to affect the children as well. Ayana stopped playing outside, too afraid of the glares from neighbors. Caleb started having nightmares, waking up in tears after hearing strange sounds outside his window. Marcus and Denise tried to keep their fears from their kids, but the strain was impossible to hide. Feeling cornered, the Johnsons decided it was time to fight back. They contacted an attorney, hoping to put an end to the harassment. Their lawyer, a sharp and determined woman named Olivia Harris, began investigating the complaints, the fake notices, and the rumors. And it didn't take long for Olivia to find the cracks in Karen's carefully constructed facade. "These letters aren't real," Olivia told the Johnsons one evening, "and the zoning violations? Completely fabricated. This is harassment, plain and simple." For the first time in weeks, Marcus and Denise felt a glimmer of relief. They weren't alone in this fight anymore. But as Olivia dug deeper, she uncovered something neither the Johnsons nor Karen were prepared for. Something that would change everything. Olivia Harris had seen cases like this before, cases where prejudice and entitlement masked a deeper insecurity. But as she dug through the legal records, she stumbled upon something she didn't expect. The house at the center of this conflict had a story of its own, one that stretched back generations. And as she pieced it together, the truth emerged: the great-uncle she barely knew. It turned out that decades earlier, Denise's relative, a savvy businessman, had quietly purchased several properties in this neighborhood. He was one of the first black homeowners in the area, navigating systemic barriers to ensure his family's future. Though he passed away years ago, his will left the house to Denise, making her not just the rightful owner of her home, but also, ironically, Karen's landlord. For Olivia, the discovery was a bombshell. She immediately contacted the Johnsons to share the news. Sitting across from them at their dining table, she laid out the evidence: deeds, wills, and legal documents that painted a clear picture. For Olivia, the discovery was a bombshell. She immediately contacted the Johnsons to share the news. Sitting across from them at their dining table, she laid out the evidence: deeds, wills, and legal documents that painted a clear picture. "Denise," Olivia said, her voice calm but firm, "this isn't just your home. Technically, Karen is renting her property from you. She's been living here under a sublease agreement tied to your family's ownership for years." "Wait," Marcus said, leaning forward. "You're telling us that Karen, our neighbor, the one trying to evict us, she's been paying rent to us all this time?" "Indirectly, yes," Olivia replied. "And if she continues this harassment, we can not only shut her down, but also take legal action against her." For the Johnsons, the revelation was both shocking and empowering. They finally understood the full extent of Karen's hypocrisy, but they also knew this was far from over. Karen didn't know the truth yet, and when she found out, things would only escalate further. When Karen received the notice, delivered directly by Olivia, she dismissed it at first. To her it was impossible, absurd even. The idea that the Johnsons could own not just their home, but hers as well, was a reality she refused to accept. This is a lie, she muttered to herself. They must have forged this. There's no way. There's no way they own anything here. But as the truth began to settle in, Karen's behavior shifted from denial to desperation. She started spreading even more outrageous lies to the neighbors, claiming the Johnsons were con artists who had tricked their way into the community. Her whispers became shouts, and her polite facade finally cracked. They're trying to take over. They're liars. You can't trust people like them. Karen's desperation quickly turned dangerous. She vandalized the Johnsons' property, smashing their garden lights and spray-painting hateful messages on their garage door in the middle of the night. She even began calling the police with false reports, claiming the Johnsons were engaging in illegal activities. But each time, her lies unraveled. The police found no evidence of wrongdoing, and the Johnsons documented every incident with Olivia's help. Karen's behavior became so erratic that even her staunchest supporters in the neighborhood began to question her motives. "You don't understand," Karen shouted, her voice shrill. "They're ruining everything." "No," the neighbor replied, shaking his head. "You're ruining everything." Karen was spiraling out of control, her actions becoming more erratic by the day, but what she didn't realize was that her reign of terror was about to come to an end. The Johnsons, armed with the truth and Olivia's guidance, were ready to fight back, and this time they wouldn't be fighting alone. As Karen's campaign against the Johnsons reached its peak, something changed. It began subtly. Small, almost imperceptible shifts that Karen dismissed as coincidence. Doors she swore she'd closed were suddenly ajar. Lights flickered, even when there was no storm. And then there were the whispers. "You don't belong here. You don't belong here." Karen bolted upright, her eyes darting around the room, but it was empty, silent, except for the pounding of her own heart. She blamed it on stress, telling herself it was nothing. But the occurrences only grew more disturbing. It wasn't just whispers anymore. Karen began seeing fleeting shadows, faces that materialized in the windows and then vanished. One night, as she walked through her hallway, she passed a photo of the neighborhood's original development committee, a group of all-white homeowners. But when she looked again, the faces had changed. The photo now depicted a lynch mob glaring directly at her. Karen's once pristine home became a prison of paranoia. Objects moved on their own. The walls groaned and cracked as though the house itself was alive, protesting her presence. But most chilling of all were the voices. They began to call her by name. Meanwhile, the Johnsons experienced nothing unusual. Their home remained a sanctuary, untouched by the strange occurrences plaguing Karen. For Marcus and Denise, it was as though the house was protecting them, affirming their right to be there. Karen's obsession with the Johnsons didn't waver, but now her attacks were driven by something more than hate. They were fueled by fear. She believed the Johnsons had cursed her, blaming them for the horrors she was experiencing. She tried to confront them again, pounding on their door late at night, screaming incoherent accusations. But they didn't answer. Instead, she was met with silence, and the sight of shadowy figures standing in her own yard. As the days went on, Karen's actions grew more desperate. She sprayed hateful graffiti on the Johnsons' fence, only for the paint to disappear the next morning, replaced by messages written in blood-red script. "We see you, Karen." And then came the apparitions. Ghostly figures of men, women, and children began to visit her at night, their faces marked by pain and anguish. They weren't just random specters. They were victims of systemic racism, their stories tied to the land Karen had lived on for so long. Some were former slaves, forced to labor in the area before it was developed. Others were black families who had been driven out by redlining and intimidation. "Why did you hate us?" one ghost asked, its face inches from hers. "What did we ever do to you?" Her attempts to retaliate became futile. When she tried calling the police, the line went dead, replaced by static and faint cries. When she tried leaving the neighborhood, her car refused to start, its engine emitting a sound eerily like a human wail. Even her closest allies in the neighborhood had abandoned her, repelled by her erratic behavior and the growing unease surrounding her home. The final blow came one night when Karen, driven to the brink of madness, attempted to break into the Johnsons' home, screaming that they were the source of her torment. But as she crossed their threshold, she was stopped in her tracks, not by the Johnsons, but by the spirits themselves. "You are the trespasser," one spirit said, its voice echoing like thunder. "This land does not belong to hate." Karen's once tight grip on the neighborhood unraveled completely. Her erratic behavior, combined with the supernatural occurrences that plagued her, left her isolated and paranoid. The whispers she had once spread about the Johnsons now turned against her, with neighbors openly discussing her downward spiral. Olivia's investigation into Karen's harassment had unearthed a disturbing paper trail. Years of discrimination complaints, racist emails, and fabricated reports filed against other minorities in the neighborhood. These findings, combined with eyewitness accounts from the Johnsons and other neighbors, led to Karen being brought before the local HOA and later to court. The court ordered Karen to pay restitution to the Johnsons for damages and emotional distress. But the ultimate punishment wasn't financial. It was her complete ostracization. The neighbors she had once allied with now avoided her entirely, ashamed to have ever been associated with her hatred. For the Johnsons, the storm had passed. With Karen gone, the neighborhood slowly began to transform. The once tense atmosphere eased, and neighbors who had kept their distance began to extend small gestures of friendship. A wave, a nod, even an invitation to a block party. Marcus and Denise took time to heal, focusing on their family and reclaiming their peace. Their home, once the center of so much turmoil, became a sanctuary again, a place where laughter and love flourished. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but they faced it with a renewed sense of strength. But the victory wasn't just personal. The Johnsons decided to share their story, using their platform to shed light on the insidious nature of racism in suburban America. They collaborated with local organizations to host workshops and discussions, turning their ordeal into a catalyst for change. "This isn't just about us," she said, standing before a diverse audience. "It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure what we did. Racism thrives in silence and complicity, but together we can confront it, expose it, and dismantle it." The Johnsons' efforts sparked conversations across the community, leading to initiatives aimed at promoting inclusivity and addressing systemic issues. The neighborhood, once divided, began to heal, with residents acknowledging their own biases and working to create a more welcoming environment. The Johnsons' story became a powerful reminder of resilience, justice, and the strength it takes to confront hate. In the end, Their victory was not just over Karen, but over the prejudice that had sought to drive them away. This is more than a story of one family's struggle against hate. It's a story of justice, of courage, and of the unyielding spirit needed to overcome the deep-rooted prejudice that still lingers in our society. Change begins when we confront the darkness within others and within ourselves. And as the Johnsons showed us, when we stand together, love will always find a way to prevail. The story of the Johnsons and their fight against hate is a microcosm of a much larger struggle, a struggle that persists in communities across the world. Racism doesn't always come in the form of blatant acts or overt discrimination. Often, it hides in whispers, in assumptions, in policies designed to exclude rather than include. But as this story shows, silence and complicity are what allow it to grow. This isn't just about one neighbor or one family. It's about the systems that allow prejudice to persist. It's about the unspoken rules that dictate who belongs and who doesn't. It's about all of us, our choices, our actions, and our willingness to speak out against injustice, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. The question we must all ask ourselves is this: are we standing against hate, or are we allowing it to take root? The answer isn't always easy, but it's necessary. Change starts with awareness, with education, and with the courage to say, "This is not okay." This story may have concluded, but the conversation doesn't end here. What are your thoughts? What emotions did this story evoke in you? Have you witnessed or experienced similar struggles in your community? We want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this important dialogue. And don't stop there. Share this video with your friends and family. Start a conversation in your own circle about the subtle ways racism manifests and what we can do to dismantle it. Together, we can amplify these stories and drive the change we need to see. This story showed us what happens when hate meets resistance. But what happens when privilege meets karmic justice? In our next video, we'll uncover another shocking true story, one that will challenge everything you thought you knew about fairness and fate. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and join us as we uncover more stories of justice, resilience, and the human spirit. Until next time, remember, hate will always falter in the face of truth.